Well, hello, fellow nerds. It is November, which means I can only talk about one thing and one thing only. The 5th of November. No, not because of the presidential election, but because it was my birthday. Though it has been the presidential election 3 times in my lifetime, 2 in the past decade, which is quite interesting. Not always great, but my birthday always goes noticed, not because it sometimes falls on a presidential election, but because it is always celebrated in Britain as Bonfire Night, or Guy Fawkes Day. Every year, here in Britain, we celebrate Parliament not being blown up, but even that is kind of a questionable approach to what this topic is about. Because in reality, what we're celebrating isn't that big of a deal. In fact, it's less of a bang and more of a bit of a fart. I'm not sure if anyone knows of that episode from Friends, a very badly aged show. However, there is an episode where Ross is on a stakeout with some police cops, and on the stakeout they think a gunfire goes off. It's not a gun going off, it's actually a car backfiring. However, Ross goes around telling everyone that he almost died and he has a new lease of life, and that is basically what the Gunpowder Plot was. The Gunpowder Plot, basically, is the car backfiring. We are celebrating every year a car backfiring because even if Guy Fawkes hadn't been discovered, even if he lit the match, lit the fuse and set alight all the gunpowder, nothing would have happened. And we know that, they know that, and yet we still celebrate it. So we all know the basics of the Gunpowder Plot. In 1605, a group of English Catholics plotted to blow up the Palace of Westminster during the state opening of Parliament, which would have killed King James I of England and members of both the Houses of Parliament and the House of Lords. The conspiracy was led by Robert Catesby and included many other conspirators, but most famously Guy Fawkes, Thomas Percy, and Thomas Winter. The group smuggled 36 barrels of gunpowder into a basement under the House of Lords, and Guy Fawkes was left in charge of executing the plan, as he was the gunpowder expert, having been a professional soldier. The other conspirators were basically upper-class provincial Catholics who didn't know what to do with gunpowder, so good old Yorkshireman Fawkes was left in charge. The plot was foiled when an anonymous letter was sent to the Catholic nobleman Lord Monteagle, revealing all the details of the plot. The gunpowder was discovered along with Guy Fawkes, who was arrested and then made the celebrity of the Gunpowder Plot history and holiday, despite Robert Catesby masterminding the entire conspiracy. Now, Guy Fawkes was a little less interested in the king's Protestant stance, although he did care for that. Everyone feared the heretical views that would drive out the Catholic subjects. But Guy Fawkes had another driving behind him. He really hated the Scots, and the king was a Scot. He was formerly known as King James VI of Scotland before he was James I of England. Interestingly, Fawkes wasn't born a Catholic. He converted in his teenage years to Catholicism after his widowed mother married a Catholic. According to the record of his arrest, Fawkes allegedly expressed strong anti-Scottish prejudices, and when asked why he needed that much gunpowder, he allegedly replied, "To blow up you Scottish beggars back to your native mountains." Fawkes was obviously sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered. According to a contemporary account, quote, "Last of all came the great devil of all, Guy Fawkes, alias Johnson, who should have put fire to the powder. His body being weak with the torture and sickness, he was scarce able to go up the ladder. Yet with much ado, by the help of his hangman, went high enough to break his neck by the fall. He made no speech, but with his crosses and idle ceremonies made his end upon the gallows and the block, to the great joy of all the beholders, that the land was ended of all wicked villainy." James I passed a Thanksgiving Act to celebrate the failure of the Gunpowder Plot and his deliverance from danger, which involved special church services, bonfires and fireworks. The latter two we still perform today. So whilst many of us are cynical of, Parliament, and even more cynical of a holiday celebrating its continued existence hundreds of years later, what's truly baffling about the holiday is that it's a celebration of absolutely nothing. There were numerous conspiracies against James I leading up to this one, all of which were foiled or failed, and this one was no more dramatic than any of those that were never acted out. The gunpowder would have never have blown if Guy Fawkes, in some dramatic reenactment, lit the fuse in front of the arresting party and threw it on the powder. The gunpowder was long decayed, all thanks to a plague. State opening of Parliament in 1605 should have taken place on the 7th of February, but plague broke out on the city and lockdown was imposed upon everyone. Food, medicines and Holy Communion were given to those in quarantine using a 2-metre long pole with a shovel at the end of it, and it was poked through open windows. Though unlike our lockdown, if you broke lockdown rules, you would be whipped if you had no signs of the plague on you. If, however, you had signs of the plague on you, you were executed. Now, this is where many people report the story that the conspirators dug a tunnel beneath Parliament, with eyewitnesses backing up the story that they had heard the sounds of tunnelling. When under torture, Fawkes also admitted to said tunnel, but no evidence of any tunnel has ever been found, and why would they need to dig a tunnel when they could row the gunpowder across the Thames at night, carry it straight into an undercroft which they had legally rented as a storage space? The space that they legally leased as a storage space was directly underneath the first floor of the House of Lords, and they leased it back in March, which is likely where the gunpowder sat and was left to decay by November as the lockdown dragged on. A spy master, Robert Cecil, who tried to convince both Protestants and Catholics that it was actually the Jesuit priests loyal to Rome who were really behind the conspiracy, and was even carried out in the Thanksgiving Act, or the observance of the 5th of November 1605, which every vicar was compelled by law to read aloud at congregation annually on the 5th of November until 1859. It said, quote, "Many malignant and devilish papists, Jesuits, and seminary priests, much envying and fearing, conspired most horribly, when the king, the queen, the prince, and the lords spiritual and temporal, and commons, should have been assembled in the upper house of Parliament, suddenly to have blown up the said whole house with gunpowder, an invention so inhuman, barbarous, and cruel, as the like was never before heard of, which would have turned to the utter ruin of the whole kingdom." Now, some historians have argued that the decayed gunpowder would have done a decent amount of damage, whilst others say that it wouldn't have done anything. Fundamentally, Bonfire Night is a holiday perpetuating a narrative that justifies religious divisions. Since 1559, papal supremacy over the Christian Church in England had been abolished. The English monarchs reigned supreme. The belief in a universal church under God became a political offence, and English Catholics were automatically guilty of high treason, a crime that was punished by hanging, drawing, quartering offending men, and burning women. Masses were banned, priests were outlawed, and some were even executed. After the Gunpowder Plot, predictably, the government enacted laws that further restricted the rights of Catholics in England, which included forcing Catholics to take an oath of allegiance and denying the Pope's authority over the king. Roman Catholics were forbidden from practising the professions of law and medicine, and from acting as guardians or trustees, and their homes were regularly raided should the law perceive it was dutiful. So why we celebrate this holiday is bonkers. What's funny is it seemed to be a bigger thing when I was a child, and potentially it's also much less of a big thing in Scotland, considering part of the conspiracy was against a Scottish person, so it's not really a celebrated thing up here. It used to be a big deal when I was a child back in England, and I don't think it is so much anymore. I think people have become cynical enough to realise that this is a bonkers holiday. But thank you so much for listening to today's wee video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm hoping to do more chatty, smaller history videos going forward, and more just chatty literary videos as well. So I hope you enjoy that. If you liked it, please consider liking and subscribing, and thank you to my Patreons, as always, my fellow nerdy lot. I love you so dearly, and I will see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.